Hey, this is Pixel. Today I'm taking a look at a game called Tinkertown. So this one is an early access game, and I think that the early access reviewing conundrum is in full force with this particular game. What is that early access conundrum? Well, the early access conundrum for me is trying to judge a game based on the content that's there, knowing that the developers really have multiple ways that they can present an early access game. You can either present a small amount of content, polish the basics, polish a very small amount of content, and then release that to users so they can consume that while you are creating and polishing more content, but then the user doesn't really know exactly what content is going to be present at the full launch. Conversely, you could create a scaffolding for all of the content that will be in the game, but there will be holes in different parts of it and a lot more bugs. And then the user is going to have a less enjoyable experience, but will know better what the game will look like in the end. With Tinkertown, which is an open world crafting game, much like Stardew Valley meets Terraria almost, I found that I was loving the experience that I was having within the game, but not knowing exactly where this game is going to go was the biggest drawback as to whether or not I could endorse it. So after this minute-and-a-half long rant, let me just get to the brass tacks of what I think about what's there and what I think needs to be present as they move towards the full release. This being a crafting game, first and foremost, I'm really glad to say that the crafting here is great. Every time you get a new item, your recipe book automatically updates and you see little notifications for that update. And then when you interact with the different crafting stations that are in the game, much like Terraria's crafting works, you'll find that those recipes are there and you'll know how to make them based on the other ingredients that you may need to find or may have in your inventory. What I did think could be helpful in this game is to actually have a recipe book in and of itself. So you're able to look through it by different categories of crafting stations and then see all of the different things. As you're out in the field collecting ingredients, you'll know then what to get rather than having to go back to your town or back to your house and look through your crafting stations to see exactly what you're after. The game progression with your crafting also is fairly refined, even though it is a little bit small right now. You venture out and you find materials, whether it be rocks that need to be mined with a pickaxe, or trees that need to be hacked down with an axe, or enemies that need to be killed with your sword. Now, you can use your axe and your pickaxe to fight as well, but I found that using swords was much more efficient. As you find new things out in the field, the farther you go away from your house, the more exotic the materials will be, and at some point in time you will need to go back to your house, craft yourself a new form of equipment and a new form of tools, and then venture back out into the field in order to gather those new resources. As you progress farther and farther, eventually you will find new biomes to explore that have new enemies and new materials in them. From my experience, I was only able to find 3 biomes in this initial version. I found a desert, a frozen area, and then the starting forest area. While the world is based on a random generator, there is limits to how far you can go. At some point you do run up to the edge and you will run into the ocean. That's an important fact because in this game, if you touch the water, it will damage you automatically, so you'll want to avoid all rivers and oceans, thus you become dead. This does seem to be a bit of an overzealous game design choice to damage the player and therefore disincentivize them from touching water. It would seem better of an implementation for them to just halt the player's progress so they couldn't walk out into the water. With all of the crafting materials that you gather over time, you are going to find yourself making a lot of things. But how many things are there for you to make out of the gate? Well, of the things I found in the game, there were 2 primary building materials, wood and stone. You could build wood buildings and you could build stone buildings. There are, I believe, 4 different types of metal that you can create armors and weapons with. There were armor sets as well made out of cactus and skulls and chitin, and I'm sure that I didn't see them all. This all being said, it's very clear that Tinkertown, in its first early access version, is just going to nail the crafting side. There's tons of stuff to be crafted, there's tons of stuff to be found. That is not a concern of this initial first version. But that doesn't mean that I don't have concerns, because there are a lot of elements in this game that are lacking that need a lot more clarity as to what they will become in the long run. First off is the combat, which right now in its current form is extremely lackluster. Melee attacks are all very similar, and the enemy does a very similar melee attack. It's very easy to dodge the enemy. There's not much of a mechanic at all for the combat. It's very, very bland, very, very one-dimensional, and it needs to be overhauled overall. We need to have more weapons. We need to have something else to make the player actually engage more during the attacking phase and during the defending phases. These combat issues extend beyond just the player, though. A lot of the enemies have very similar attack patterns, particularly melee enemies. All the melee enemies attack and move very, very similarly. There are a number of varied enemies, ones that shoot different projectiles, and those are a welcome change, but they also needed a little bit of tweaking. I did, though, find that those enemies out on the fringes, a little bit farther away from the forest zone, their variance was a welcome change from the melee characters that you found in copious amounts near the beginning areas. This gets me to the second major issue of the content in this game, and that is the world exploration. Now, the size of the island that they create with the random generator is fairly good. It did take me probably an hour or two to get all the way around the perimeter of the entire island. And one of the interesting things I found was that there was different monuments or unique items that I found while I was exploring around the map, and that was kind of heartening. However, there was very little out in the world to interact with, and there was very little indication that there was anything that was going to be built into the game as interaction within the world. The entire time I was exploring, I just kept waiting to find a dungeon or some sort of interacting NPC or something that would stop me in my exploration and make me marvel for a second at the world or the detail of the world. And so far in this very early access version, those things just don't exist yet. Those unique monuments and those unique areas that you do run into, they are a little bit of an indication that that's part of what the plan for this game is, but the game in its current form lacks any real indication of what the plans are for the exploration side of this game. So I guess that brings us to the real question, which is this game worth buying in early access? I personally had a lot of fun with this game for about 4 or 5 hours. However, at that point, I also really felt like I had seen and done everything there is to see and do. I'd say with that in mind, if your indicator of if a game is worth the money is what you can do with it at that exact moment, this game's probably not for you, at least not at this stage in its development. There is a lot of great content here. There is a lot of good early indication that this game is going to grow and be something better than it is today. But if you want enjoyment and you don't care to sit and watch a game grow, this one might not be ready for you. However, if you'd like to be an early adopter of a game that really does look like it may grow and be something that is memorable to a large base of players, this game could be that. It seems like everything that they've created so far in this early phase is pretty well polished. Yes, there's some combat mechanics that need to be reworked, and there's a whole lot of exploration content that needs to be added. New biomes need to be added. Eventually, a lot more crafting will need to be added. But I did walk away from this game with a lot of confidence that these developers know what they're doing and will be able to create future content for this game that is just as fun as what they've created so far today. The name of the game again is Tinkertown, coming out on Steam on December 3rd. If you liked this video, then like this video. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, then take a look at some of my other reviews and the talks that I've done. And if you like those, then consider subscribing. Thanks for hanging out with me. And until next time, this has been Pixel.